Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today I am doing a review for Stephen King's 11/22/63. So this giant chunker of a book that has been in many of my videos because it was released in 2011 and I have owned it since, I guess, probably the year after. I don't know. I don't remember if this paperback came out like the year after or not, but I have owned it for a very long time and have never picked it up. And so it ended up on my TBR of Shame video, and then it ended up in my 5-star predictions video for this year. It was a book that I very much was looking forward to reading and couldn't really understand why I hadn't got around to reading it. But I finally did. I had put it on my 22 books to read in 2022 list, and I think from a push from my friends who had already read it, I decided to finally pick it up, and I'm really, really happy that I did. And I'll just start off by saying that I really enjoyed this book. It was great. It definitely makes the list of my favorite Stephen King books. It is not my favorite Stephen King book. I know for some people they feel like this is their favorite book of his, or that they believe that it is his best book. And I do think that in terms of modern Stephen King, it is one of the very best that I have read. But it is not my absolute favorite of all time. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars, and over the course of the review, I'll talk a little bit about what I really, really liked, and maybe a couple of small things that didn't work so well for me. This is immensely popular, and I'm going to put it down now because it's also really heavy. It's a really popular one by Stephen King, and so I think a lot of people already know the basic setup. We have our main character, whose name is Jake Epping, and he lives in Maine. He's a school teacher with kind of a sucky life. His wife was an alcoholic. He has recently been divorced, and he is looking for something worthwhile in his life. He has been accused by his ex-wife of being unfeeling because he's not someone to show a lot of outward emotion. And he's kind of stuck, I think. He's in a rut. He's not sure what to do. He's still young, but he's not sure what his ambitions might be or what he might want out of life. And as part of his teaching duties, he is giving a remedial class to people who want to earn their GED. So helping them with their English essays, helping them learn to edit and write papers. And he receives a paper from one of his students who also happens to be the janitor at the school in which he works. And this paper that he receives is about the janitor's life and the worst night of his life, the worst thing that ever happened to him. And this story evokes some intense emotions in Jake. He finds himself feeling very moved by the story. He feels that it is one of the best pieces of writing that he has ever experienced. And he finally starts to feel some of that ice cracking and feel some of that emotion that he's been accused of not having. Shortly after this, he is at the diner in his small town, and the owner of the diner, who's a man named Al, tells him that he has a secret that he wants to impart on him. And what this secret ends up being is that Al has discovered a portal to the past. So he has discovered a portal that will bring them from 2011 back to 1958. And so Al divulges that he has known about this portal for a long time, that he has sat with this information, and that he has a plan that he believes will change the world for the better. Unfortunately, Al is very unwell, and he doesn't feel that he is the right person to carry out this plan. So he bequeaths this information, I guess, on Jake and sets him up with a quest to decide if he wants to be the person to change the course of history and change the world. And given that the title of the book is 11/22/63, this event, this kind of watershed moment that Al believes has changed American history and world history and set us along on a path for the worse, is the assassination of JFK. So he believes that if someone could go back in time and prevent JFK from being assassinated, that the world would be a better place, that, calamities could be avoided, that perhaps Martin Luther King would never have been assassinated. The Vietnam War would have had a different outcome. So he thinks that this kind of cascade of unfortunate events that has led to the world that we live in now all has this kind of point of impact at the JFK assassination. So he truly believes that if someone wanted to change the world for the better, that is where they could start. That would be a moment that would put us on a better path. And so he has to try to convince Jake to take on this mantle, to make this his own quest, and to go back in time and kind of play out the role as the person who can stop the assassination of JFK. So what we get here, like you can tell just from that brief summary, and this is all stuff that happens right at the beginning of the novel, you can tell that this is, in kind of quintessential King fashion, going to be a blend of genres. So we get our sci-fi, time travel type setup. This definitely could classify as a thriller. This is very fast paced. There are a lot of twists and turns. You know, you have an end point that you know the character is working toward, but you're not sure how they're going to get there or what they're going to do. And that really amps up the tension. And that fits in with Stephen King's usual writing style. It is not uncommon for him to execute that particular writing device, even if time travel is not involved. And then we also have elements of kind of slice of life. Stephen King does this period of time very well. If you are a fan of It, if you are a fan of The Body, if you're a fan of those kind of coming of age stories that happen in small town America in the 50s that Stephen King writes so well, then a huge portion of this novel is devoted to that very thing. So we get that kind of slice of life element. And there's also a pretty heavy undercurrent of romance in this book as well. Stephen King, one of the reasons that I really like Stephen King, and I know a lot of the people that read him also enjoy this about his writing, is that he is a very character-driven author. He spends a lot of time developing his characters, and he has some strengths that I think set him apart from most modern writers of fiction. He is able to make characters feel alive with great finesse, but it is never his writing style that he needs to lean on. It's not his technical proficiency. It's not through extensive prose. He just makes people feel like people. I think that Stephen King has a great understanding of what people are like, and he is able to bring them to life very well. From the turns of phrase that they use, the way that they interact with one another, the close personal relationships. I think that Stephen King often brings in the kind of like awkward parts of life that authors can leave out or that might be difficult to write about. And because he has no fear of bringing in those difficult aspects of relationships, it really makes his characters flourish and makes them come to life. And in a book like this one, in 11/22/63, we follow such a small cast of characters that's a really important skill. We want to believe that this character cares about certain things. We want to see how his life changes. We want to watch his relationships develop with the people that he knows either in the present or the people that he meets in the past. So being able to create that really strong character foundation is really important in a novel like this. And I think that's why Stephen King was met with such success here. I think that all the characters are really well done. I've had this chat with people on Discord before, and there have been some people who think that Stephen King writes his best dialogue, his best characters when they're back in that era, and that maybe that might not translate into modern characters as well. And I certainly think that the books that I prefer the most by Stephen King take place in that era. So I think that he definitely does do that well. And so if you like that, then 100% you should pick up this book. It is absolutely worth it. So characters get a definite recommendation from me in terms of this book. The plot at large, there have been kind of mixed opinions about this book. It's chunky. It is about 800 pages, and that's a lot of story. So, we have a very tight premise, and that is a lot of pages to spread out. Personally, I really like that. If you have never read a Stephen King book, if you're not incredibly well acquainted with his really long novels, he can take a meandering path, and he definitely does in this one. I think that he balances it really well because we have the mystery element of finding out the details of how Lee Harvey Oswald planned the JFK assassination. Did he plan it? How did he plan it? Who was involved? So there's a lot of uncovering of those details. And then, like I said, we get a lot of that slice of life the character living out his life in the 1950s and into the 1960s, which I personally think is really important because in order to care about this story, we need to care about the character. And I think that that does a lot of setting the foundation for allowing us to really grow attached to Jake and care about the same things that he cares about. But it is a meandering path. We do spend a lot of time in the past. And I can see if you are not a fan of Stephen King's writing style, if you don't already like the way that he writes books, then that might feel a little bit slow to you. Personally, I thought the pacing was really well done. It read much faster than an 800-page book to me. I found it difficult to put down. I always wanted to be flipping the page, so I didn't have those same issues with pacing, but I do recognize that that could be a problem. So if you're not someone who enjoys that kind of variety show, slice of life, we're gonna see how people lived in this era, then you might not like that. But for me, I thought that it was a delight. I really liked the multiverse tie-ins as well, so I will not give any spoilers. I think it's often safe to assume that when you're reading a Stephen King book, you have to be on the lookout for those little Easter eggs. And there's a goose egg, there's a velociraptor egg in this book. It is one of my favorite Stephen King multiverse moments. It made me cry because I'm a baby, and also just because I was so happy. It was such a nice throwback for people who have been longtime fans or people who are just fans of his work, and it, like I said, has been one of my favorite multiverse tie-ins to date. So if you are an established Stephen King fan and you're someone who usually reads a lot of horror and you're not sure what you're gonna do with this weird amalgamation of sci-fi, slice of life, thriller, I think that you'll still be happy because I think that you're still going to find things that as a fan make you go oh, I'm really happy that he did that. So I think it has a little bit for everyone. It's a great book to start with. If you have never read anything by Stephen King, this is going to be one of my go-to recommendations for people who ask me what to read by Stephen King if they get scared very easily, because there's very little horror. There is some psychological horror here. There are some really intense moments. It's a Stephen King novel, so there's some people who make really bad decisions, who are struggling with a lot, who are, not on the straight and narrow path. So there definitely are some moments that are very tense and can be frightening, but there is no overt horror in this book. But I still think that those kind of tie-ins would make it appealing to his horror fans, his faithful fans. But if you don't like being scared, if you want something standalone to read by Stephen King, if you want something where you can see him display a lot of his strengths and something that feels a bit more, I'm going to say a bit more modern. It's written, it takes place in the 1950s, but it is very clear that Stephen King was writing this book in the 2000s. If you take the presentation, some of the things that he talks about, some of the issues that he tackles, the way that he explores certain ideas or events, I think that you can tell that it is very much a product of an older Stephen King than the person who wrote a lot of his early novels. And I think that's a good thing. I think that he has shown a lot of growth as an author. I think that he pays attention to certain things a little bit more than he did in his earlier novels. And while I think that some of his earlier novels are amongst his best work, 11/22/63 is a book that should convince anybody that modern Stephen King is definitely worthwhile and worth giving a chance. So I really loved this one. I cannot recommend it highly enough. The small thing that I didn't care for as much is that I just was not super invested in that watershed moment being the JFK assassination. So I can understand why Stephen King chose this event. I know that this is a piece of American history that still absorbs and interests so many people. I know that people are hugely fascinated by this, and there's oodles of nonfiction that explores this same topic. And I think that Stephen King did his research really well from the very small amount that I know about this historical event. But I'm not American. I learned about this in terms of a world history context in school, but it's not an event where I'm oh yeah, I need to know every single detail of why this happened and what was the fallout. So just for that reason, a lot of the details around when Jake is investigating and trying to figure out, you know, who was really responsible, how do we know, what is the evidence? I think if you were someone who was hugely interested in JFK, that would just add to the excitement. And so that's where the like small 0.5 of a star went for me. But beyond that, it was an utterly engrossing, absorptive book. I really enjoyed my time reading it. Like I said, if you have not picked this up, if you are someone who watches my channel and you don't really like Stephen King or you don't really like horror, this would be a great place to give my very favorite author a try without feeling like you need to sleep with your lights on for the foreseeable future. So if you are ever going to give one of his books a try, I think this is a great place to start. And I am really happy for all of the friends who bullied me into reading it, because I had left it on the back burner for far too long, and I am very excited that I finally got to read it. That is it. I'm keeping this spoiler free. I am going to be doing a discussion with my friends, Andrew and Jimmy and Baron, because they all love this book as well. And I'm assuming we are going to give like a big spoiler filled kind of gushing review, because we all really like it at that time. So we'll talk about some of our favorite moments, some of the biggest twists, all of that kind of stuff. So if you're still interested in this book and you want to know some spoilery content, then I will give you a heads up on when that is going to happen. Otherwise, totally recommend that you pick this book up, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye!